In Florida, politicians and special interests have delivered an overpowering stench of toxic scum. And that's not a commentary on the state of our politics, but rather the actual byproduct of government policy and development after decades of environmental neglect. We call this stuff toxic algae, but it's technically cyanobacteria that's infesting lakes, rivers, and ponds all across the state. And this year, the legislature passed a bill that could slow one of the most effective strategies in fighting it. Because this bacteria feeds off of fertilizer, and the legislature voted to block local governments from revising or adding any new fertilizer bans for the next year.
These local fertilizer ordinances are some of the most effective things that we've done to respond to this pollution crisis in Florida.
Now, to see why, you have to see what's in this green slime and how our government feeds it.
You sort of forget how close, clean, and marvelous Florida really is.
First, politicians sold Florida as a paradise for clean water and cheap subdivisions, and then fouled up the water by building so many subdivisions.
It's predominantly the commercial, the residential, and the agricultural operations north of the lake.
Running from Polk County through Orlando.
All the way down through Orlando into the lake.
Well, chemical fertilizer is often overused, and rains and sprinklers wash it into ponds and lakes across the state and into the big one to our south, Lake Okeechobee. And again, it feeds these blooms of cyanobacteria we call toxic algae. And to prevent flooding around the lake, our government pumps that toxic algae east and west through our rivers and estuaries. Now, it takes many different forms. Some are more serious than others. One of the most common is lyngbia. It looks like this brown gunk, and people often confuse it for dead seagrass, but it's not. And if you catch and eat fish that ate lyngbia, it can cause what we call seafood poisoning. But there are also more serious forms that can make the water look like green paint or this bluish purple color. And among other things, that emits a liver toxin called microcystins that has been known to sicken and kill dogs that drink from infected lakes, rivers, and ponds.
She walked a few feet and she was kind of rocking, and then she just went over.
And scientists have also tied microcystins to liver damage in humans. In fact, researchers at Ohio State University tied a prior cluster of toxic blooms north of Stewart to non-alcohol related liver damage in people. And in addition to that, this kind of bloom also emits a brain toxin called BMAA that scientists have correlated long-term exposure to brain damage.
The BMAA in these blooms can lead to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. What happens is the BMAA causes the proteins in your brain neurons to get all tangled up, and that you see the slow accumulation of tangled up proteins in your neurons until they get completely clogged, and then the neurons die. So you just slowly develop these diseases over the time scale of 10 or 20 years.
In Guam, researchers associated a spike in ALS-like disease in the 1950s to people who ate fruit bats contaminated with high levels of BMAA. And around 5 years ago, when Dr. Larry Brand at the University of Miami tested shellfish in South Florida, he found they had more BMAA than the bats.
I found some fish and crabs which had concentrations of BMAA twice as high as the fruit bats of Guam. You have no idea you've been exposed to it, and then 10 or 20 years later you might come down with a neurodegenerative disease.
Well, that's a theory scientists still debate, but there is no doubt the waters flowing out of Lake Okeechobee and in ponds and lakes across Central Florida are a toxic mess.
When the water looked like split pea soup, guacamole, I still saw people at the fillet tables pulling fish out of these waters, still eating them. But I saw a couple kids jumping in the water and swimming around in that green sludge.
Now, the good news is that scientists are finding new ways to kill it and prevent it from forming in the first place. For example, they're already testing technology to reduce fertilizer runoff and building these bioreactors to collect stormwater runoff and clean it, and bubble and ultrasonic sound systems to kill the cyanobacteria, and more effective algicides. And as they develop those technologies, we have 17 counties across Florida and more than 100 cities that have restricted the sale of fertilizer to try to keep this problem from getting much worse than it is, especially during the summer rainy season when those bans generally kick in. But that's where state lawmakers hit the brakes at the urging of the fertilizer lobby with no public input. While existing restrictions can stay, the legislature preempted local governments from revising or passing any new fertilizer restrictions for a year, as the policies are studied by university scientists. And if the governor signs it, it will become law.
What the state legislature just did is not going to benefit our waters in Florida. The only party it benefits are fertilizer companies that sell fertilizer.
Well, the Senate president brushed off those concerns by saying they're just blocking new fertilizer restrictions for a year.
I have comfort in that it's in the implementing bill, so it's only 1 year. At that time, it then just goes away.
But in the meantime, as prior years like the summer of 2018 have shown, a lot can happen in the course of 1 year.
Look at this. That's the water in Florida right now.
A state of emergency in Florida.
I wish I hadn't splashed that on myself.
A reminder of what can suddenly pop up in a hot, rainy summer in Florida and how it relates to the business of money, power, and politics.